This is Lecture 1 of Get Excited Looking at Art. Today's lecture is being recorded in 2 parts. This is Part 1. Welcome to Exploring the Visual Arts with Raj. This is the first in a series of art appreciation lectures for lifelong learners. These recorded segments and the corresponding Zoom follow-up sessions are going to be a lot of fun. My approach combines art appreciation, art history, and some perspectives from today's art market combined in what I hope you find to be a very engaging way. Consider our sessions what I term art edutainment. The scholarship is there, but the emphasis is on viewing art as recreation. We've configured our class to provide plenty of time for us to interactively discuss the artworks during our Zoom sessions. My apologies, but this first part of our 2-step module is me talking and you listening. Periodically, throughout the recording, you'll be posed with questions to consider before the Zoom sessions. Some are rhetorical, which I'll be answering, and others will be for you to ponder until we get together live online. I encourage you to write down your thoughts so we can have a productive Zoom session. In brief, this series is based on what I found most interesting as a 50-something going to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and later finishing my master's degree in art history through Lindenwood University. Along the way, I became a fine art appraiser, studied the auction market at Sotheby's Institute in London, and for 10 years I was a docent for the Milwaukee Art Museum, where I specialized in leading tours on the weekends for a mixture of art enthusiasts and first-time museum goers. Traditional art classes progress through a chronology of dates and their corresponding developments in art. This is not one of those classes. We will be focusing on the big events in the history of art which made an impact. Those include the Paris art salons, which led to the Impressionists, an example being Impression Sunrise in the upper left, and the ashcan artist at the turn of the 20th century, which you see on the lower right, and the 1913 Armory Show, which for many Americans was their introduction to modern art, and for others who had some familiarity, it was a move deeper into modern art, looking at artists such as Henri Matisse, who you see in artwork of his in the middle. Now, the term modern art requires some explanation. Each generation of artists includes some who are responding to and often rejecting the art of the past. This attitude about moving past the past, if you will, accelerated in the second part of the 1800s. Now, this talk comes with a cautionary notice. While my language is casual, and that's deliberately casual, my scholarship is rigorous. I also hope I'm not too politically incorrect. We will cover a lot of ground with plenty of tangents, and frankly, I find the tangents the most fun. I love to see where the conversation and the art takes us. And so now I ask you, why do you like art? Do you like talking about art? Is there any art that particularly moves you, or is there any art that leaves you just completely flat? Some of what we'll cover today draws attention to the power of art, including its impact, how art can create special moments, a few artistic techniques for you to know, and how work's meaning can change. You'll see and hear more about Edward Manet than the more familiar Claude Monet. The picture that you see in front of you now on the right is by Edward Manet of artist Berthe Morisot. I just referenced that we'll not be looking at art in a straight line. Art, historic periods are often presented in linear fashion, as in this blue spreadsheet. It's helpful to a point, but lacks the context the upcoming pie chart will offer. To illustrate my point, let's take a look at this work. It's by Mihály Munkácsy, he's a Hungarian, from 1886. How do you like it? How might you describe it? Yes, it's a mother and child on a couch, with a kitten between them and what appears to be perhaps the kitten's mother on the carpet in between them also. Does the blue and white traditional chronology help us understand this? No. Instead, let's look at my pie chart. Yes, this art lecture includes PowerPoint charts. Remember, I was a businessman before I moved into the art field, so you get pie charts. The quadrants shed more understanding on the painting. Munkácsy, the artist, was trained in Vienna. At the time, Vienna was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When he came to Paris, he spent a time studying with the Barbizon artist in Fontainebleau. So even though this is an indoor scene, you might get a sense that the paint application is more like an outdoor composition. The loose strokes might also indicate exposure to the Impressionists, Monet and Renoir, but the biggest influence on the work came from Munkássy's timing. He arrived in Paris in 1867 in time for the Universal Exposition. It had a large display of Japanese arts and crafts, in particular the ukiyo prints we all know. Hokusai's Great Wave, Hiroshige's views of Edo, Udawara's geishas with chopsticks in their hair. These were all the rage in Europe, and can anyone guess why? Well, Japan had just opened their borders after more than 200 years. So Europe was now being flooded with this completely new aesthetic. Do you see any Oriental treatment in this painting? I do. I think the left side would be blank if it were not for Munkássy's application of some of this new Japanese style he was exposed to. Now, isn't that better than pointing at a date and a movement on a timeline? Now, artists by their various nature are constantly looking and learning from others and often prior generations of art. For artists studying the past, their challenge becomes, how do I find my own voice after I study another artist's methods? So, for example, the Impressionist Edward Degas argued strongly with Edward Manet about Manet's reliance on the Spanish art he studied. Yet I want to comment more about the Japanese influence. Monet, Degas, Vincent van Gogh, and Frank Lloyd Wright were all among those enamored with Japanisme aesthetic. The Hiroshige print on the left is cropped, so we're brought in closer to the scene, and the descending diagonal leads our eye deeper into the work. You can see all these methods and also a flattened depth being applied in the Degas Ballet pastel on the right. Now a word about the many meanings an artwork can have and how those meanings are ever changing. The meaning, or some people say the reading, of a work could be by the artist, by us speculating about the artist's intentions, or by we, the viewer, looking at it just today. Those are just a few examples, but there are no limits to the ways to consider art. We might be looking with no agenda other than to enjoy the piece, or we may be looking into a work to see how diversity is reflected or some other criteria. An artist may have had a goal in mind while making the work. Was it a reflection of their artistic expression, political, or perhaps creating work that will appeal to the art buying market and sell quickly? Then again, it could be a commission work, where the artist was just following instructions. Pre-Photoshop, these directives still existed. Make me look prosperous, powerful, 10 pounds lighter, and of course good looking. What do we think when we consider the work today? What if it was considered 500 years ago, 200 years ago, in a faraway place? What if it was made during our lifetime? Would that possibility change how we read a work because we think we relate a little bit more because it's contemporaneous to our lifetime? All of these things are ways to look into an artwork. There are no right or wrong answers. once one delves into the arena of meanings and what is termed critical thought. It depends greatly on the lenses the viewer is using. Now this is heady stuff. Those lenses could include thinking about what the artist had in mind, like I just mentioned, or how did the work reflect the culture of its time? What might a feminist interpretation be? Or a reading by people of color, not necessarily African Americans, but all ethnicities. Does the work provide any indication of how matters of diversity, equity, or inclusion were or are treated? Such considerations are very much 21st century topics, but were they relevant in the earlier works? You can see the list can go on, and that is the power of art. Now let's consider the use of art as a metaphor. Generalissimo Francisco Franco was dictator of Spain and part of the original Axis of Evil, along with Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. In 1837, Franco's nationalist forces were not making the progress he had expected in the Spanish Civil War. So to affirm his might, he asked Hitler to assist in squashing the Popular Front. The Nazis' Luftwaffe Air Force used their new blitzkrieg firebombing technique to level the town of Guernica in the northern eastern Catalan region of Spain. This photograph captures the images after the strafing of the town. It's horrible. What are your reactions as you view this image? Now it so happens that the Spanish artist Pablo Picasso, who was by then living in France, had already committed to creating an artwork for the 1937 International Exposition in June in Paris. Having grown up with his parents and sisters in Barcelona, he was carefully watching events in his homeland, and during the 6 weeks leading up to the exposition, he painted his masterpiece, Guernica. Hopefully, you've seen this piece either when it was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York or at the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid. Which image conveys a more impactful message? The photograph of the bombed-out city or the Picasso painting? What do you think of this 11-foot by 25-foot black and white work? Don't you just feel the anguish? Look at the tortured mother holding her lifeless child on the left, or the straining horse with the spear coming through his tongue. I look forward to hearing everyone's interpretations during our Zoom. From looking at the artwork, do you feel you know anything about Picasso? When we get together, we'll have some fun. I'll share a psychoanalyst theory on the man. Also, we'll include a few art market tidbits about Picasso's and the art market response to Picasso. If you do get to see Guernica, you'll find an adjacent gallery filled with his preliminary drawings, particularly of the bull, who he views as a combination of a symbol of Spain or himself. It also features many photos of him working on the work, taken at the time by his girlfriend, Dora Maar. During this Guernica period, he was living with Marie-Therese Walter, with whom he had his daughter, and Dora Maar, who had an apartment near where he was doing the artwork. Picasso often lived with one and had another quietly or not so secretly nearby. I have to say, the Antonio Banderas did a masterful job of portraying the artist in the 10-part National Geographic Genius series, Picasso. It's available through Amazon Prime and Hulu, and it is outstanding. Here's another off-the-beaten-path art topic for you. Do you prefer that your artists retain the same style throughout their career? Raphael would be an example. Or do you find it more interesting to see the artist progress through various styles? Picasso, for one. While you ponder your response, allow me to drop in a personal story, and it relates to these questions. Art can be a wonderful means to connect with our loved ones. To no one's surprise, my daughter received an earful about art when she was growing up. I never imagined that she was actually listening. Then a few years ago at the Art Institute of Chicago, our then young adult exclaimed, "Dad, is that the tree guy?" So see if you can guess who the artist is as I move through the slides. You now see his first work, and you see on the right the second work they did a number of years later. Now, what we'll see is his third piece. It again was a couple years later, this one being close to the Cubist period. And finally, the work you might immediately recognize on the right. Yes, this is Piet Mondrian. Would you have thought that that Dutch artist could have evolved as he did? He had a traditional arts education. His early works included windmills and leafy trees. As he continued to paint, after the leaves had fallen, he discovered that he enjoyed painting the intricate branches as much as the colorful leaves. His interest in the branches further distilled into a maze of lines, and over time, he reduced the number of lines. The branches of his earlier mature drawings, or nature drawings, became the planes created for the branches in his later simplified lines. Color was only sparingly introduced. The tree guy, indeed. We just saw how an artist chooses to apply color is an art. How the colors may interact with one another or with the viewer is arguably a science. How we respond can be impacted by the artist's use of color. Allow me to reference just a few lessons again from the color wheel. We're familiar with the term, "you're looking hot," or "I'm feeling blue." So looking at the chart with yellow at the top, colors along the left side, the oranges and the reds, are what we perceive as warm colors. When we see them, they generally emote more emotion. On the right side, we have the greens and the blues, and these we consider to be cool colors. Edward Hopper uses strong lines and color to steer our eyes in this picture, the Nighthawks. Do you see how the yellow helps us find the man and woman? Pablo Picasso painted the old guitarist in the period just after his closest friend died. Do you think the color helps you feel the loneliness? We'll discuss both the Picasso and the Hopper paintings when we have our call. Saturday Afternoon on the Isle of Grand Jatte is the most famous painting done in the pointillist style. George Seurat created more than 30 studies in preparation for this monumental work. Seurat used small dots to create the work. Throughout it, he was quite deliberate in his use of adjacent complementary dots and the transitions from each color grouping to the next grouping. By today's standards, one would certainly consider Seurat to be on the obsessive-compulsive side. Quite ingeniously, the Art Institute of Chicago, who owns this painting, conducted a fundraiser a few years ago during which donors could adopt a dot. You could buy a black, red, green, or blue, and each dot came with a certificate explaining how that color is used in the composition. And yes, we did buy some dots. How do you like the Grand Jatte? In what way does it work for you? Aside from the color, do you get any sense of rhythm in the picture? Now that I brought that up, do you see evidence of why there's a certain rhythm in the picture? That's right, Seurat repeats many of the same shapes and color schemes throughout the work. In today's Photoshop world, we could imagine a picture where the artist copied images and then copied them and pasted them again in the foreground and the midground and the background and so forth, building a distant perspective. You can imagine just how tightly wound he would have to be to create such a challenging work. As a means of controlling how the work is displayed, look carefully at the outer edge if you're ever close to this work. Seurat painted his own pointillist border as a means of controlling the adjacencies once it's framed, because they didn't have control over how it was going to be framed and what kind of wall it was going to be on. Seurat and his followers coined the term pointillism, which is sometimes also known as divisionism. Now that we're warmed up and immersed in artsy thoughts, we'll learn more about perspective, view more paintings, and have some fun with mirrors in part 2.